All right, so recording is in progress. We'll get this started. All right, so hey everybody, it's Randy with Direct Action Combat Performance.
Hey guys, I'm Sam from Adaptive State Performance.
So we're coming to you from two different locations here. Sam is located in Ottawa, and I'm on the road providing some training to some military and law enforcement guys. So Sam and I decided to take some time out of our schedule to answer a couple of questions that were presented. The first question that we're going to address, and I'm going to let Sam kick this one off, and then I'll pile on as we get going. So Yannick Wens Vort from Trent University. So he's a university student. He's got a nutrition question with regard to macros and micros, but he also has kind of a two-part question. And his concern or question is if he's getting enough calories and where those calories should come from. So two-part question. One, I'll present to Sam, let Sam kick things off for us, is macros versus micros. What information would you share with Yannick, given the fact that he's a university student and he has limited access to specific foods? And from the email that he shared with me, it sounds like he's limited to a lot of pasta, a lot of bread, and a lot of deep fried foods that have a support to sugary type sauces. So he's limited in the quality foods that he's eating.
Yeah, I think that's a super common problem, especially with somebody whose access is extremely limited to food. It's not like he can shop for himself and provide the foods that he's ideally looking for to support something like his micronutrient needs, which a lot of people don't think about. So first of all, great job, Yannick, for thinking about your micronutrients. It is going to be extremely difficult for you to get them from your campus diet because the quality of food presented by your campus is not going to be sufficient to meet your micronutrient needs most of the time. They're not using high quality foods. They're not using high quality fats or protein sources or carb sources. A lot of it's highly processed, and as a result is not going to support your needs. So I think the easiest solution there would be instead to think about using something like a greens powder, some sort of supplementation to make sure that you are getting the things that you're very unlikely to get from the cafeteria at school. Even if you do your best to eat the most protein rich things, eat as many greens as they provide, the way they process them is going to remove a lot of those micronutrients. So you definitely would want to look at something like greens powders to supplement. I would start by making that point.
And I would pile on to that, and I would ask him to, clarify or, fully understand what the difference is between a macro and a micro. And the way I would share that with individuals is when I look at my plate, if I'm going to have a sit down meal, for example, the three macros that I want to consume and encourage an even amount is a carbohydrate. So that could be, some wild rice, there could be sweet potato, yams, something of that nature. And then for the protein consumption, whether it's animal based or vegetarian based, I'm thinking about a protein rich food that's going to be on that plate. And then the fat. So the fat, oftentimes that can come from a good quality olive oil that maybe you sprinkle over top of whatever that food is. But it can also be other things like, certain proteins like mackerel, for example, or salmon, also very rich in good quality fat. So when I look at my plate, I want to make sure that I have components of those on the plate. And then for the micronutrients, there's a lot of science to support that a lot of the micronutrients will come from vegetables and fruit. So whether or not that vegetable is cooked or raw, I try to lean more heavily on raw. But, when I'm preparing a meal, it's not uncommon to steam some broccoli or some Brussels sprouts or something of that nature. But the way I look at it from micros and macronutrients, I'm trying to, throughout the day, trying to consume a healthy amount of fruits and vegetables, because that's where the majority of the minerals and vitamins that we require are going to come from. So that's what I would share with him. Now, of course, you're limited when you're on the road, or you're limited when you are having meals provided for you. So like Sam suggested, how do we get around that? With supplementation, oftentimes people will lean heavily on protein shakes because it's readily accessible, very easy to mix it up and keep yourself going when you're on the run. But also consider something like a veggie green or an athletic green as a consumption component to ensure that you are getting your micros. Anything you want to add on that, Sam?
No, I was just going to say, even the best quality diet probably still isn't getting you all the micronutrients you need, just because of our food processing system has really removed all of that. So when you think about the meat that we're consuming, for example, is not being fed grass and good quality food. They're getting corn and they're getting things that are not containing micronutrients in the first place. So no matter where it starts in the chain, whether it's the ground to the, let's say, cattle to you, the micronutrients have been lost all throughout that process. So I take Athletic Greens every single day just to make sure I'm covering my bases. It's not like there's not very many minerals, vitamins that when you over consume them, it's dangerous. So it's better to make sure you have adequate, if anything, a little bit more, and your body kind of figures out what to do with any excess. So I would highly suggest something like that. I know that it makes me feel better when I have it. When I don't have it, I do notice a difference in certain components of my performance. So maybe protein powders would be something to consider too. It's easy to fill those gaps with things like protein bars, protein shakes. But it's, yeah, like Randy said, fruits and vegetables are extremely important for the micronutrients and that consists of your minerals, your vitamins, things like that. When you're getting the ones on campus, they're definitely not ones that are organic or that they're grown in fields that aren't, doused with fertilizer and all sorts of things. So even with the best intentions, it's a really good idea to have that safety net of some sort of supplemental regimen, something like a greens powder, to make sure you're covering your bases.
Amazing. Awesome. Thanks, Sam. And then the second component of his question, he does talk about his caloric intake. So in the email that he sent me, he suggests, Yannick, if you're watching and you're dialed in, you're suggesting that for you, it's 2,700 calories, give or take. 2,700 calories of a daily intake is what you're consuming. And, Yannick also expressed with me and shared with me that he's a pretty active guy. He's training almost every day. He's doing something, either resistance training or some sort of cardio throughout the day. So he's pretty active. So when it comes to his concern with, is he getting enough calories? I want to provide a little bit of insight, and then I would ask a question to him. So the question I would be is, what are your goals and where are you currently sitting? So if you are, an ideal height and weight, if an ideal weight for your height, in conjunction, in addition to your exercise output and the energy expended throughout the day, I would ask, what are your goals? Are you looking to lose weight? Are you looking to gain weight? Are you looking to train for an upcoming event? If there's a specific goal that's associated to how many calories you may be consuming, I would ask that question first. And then the second, not really question, I guess, point would be, personally speaking, I very, very seldom count calories. I very, very seldom concern myself with how many calories I'm consuming, because I do find it a bit nerve-wracking when you're always trying to calorie count, for lack of better terms. So instead, I personally know that I'm training pretty much every single day. I'm burning a fair bit. I will eat when I feel like I need it. I don't necessarily eat just for the sake of eating, because I don't have any weight related goals per se that I'm used to, from my past experiences. So that's how I would kind of answer that question. And then Sam, with the caloric intake, the concern that Yannick has, what information would you provide for him, given the information that we just shared about his 2,700 calorie target marker for each day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely the goal is super important, because whether you're trying to lose weight, gain weight, maintain weight, that affects what your calorie intake is. So if he is weight stable, meaning his weight barely fluctuates day to day, week to week, then obviously he's eating approximately the right amount of calories for his needs. So if his weight doesn't fluctuate by more than 3 to 5 pounds within any given, 4 to 6 week period, then he's eating the correct amount of calories. But if his weight is fluctuating a lot, then clearly there's an energy balance problem that he needs to address, whether that's up or down, increasing or decreasing his calories. The amount of work that he's saying that he does in terms of his training and stuff like that, like what are you training for, is an important question, which you brought up, because if you're training for athletic performance, for example, then you'd want to make sure that your macro split reflects that. You would want to have more carbohydrates than protein and fat, obviously, if you're an athlete, because carbs are super important. Your protein needs need to be met so that you're not losing muscle mass, especially if you're eating in a deficit. So that's something to consider. And then most people, the fats is where they can kind of decrease those and increase the other things. That's usually what you do. So depending what your goal is, depending if you're losing weight or maintaining or gaining weight, like if he's trying to put on a ton of muscle mass, then his protein needs have to be super, super high, which goes back to our previous point about supplementing something like protein. So depending what the goal is, you'll have to play around with those 3 variables, because those are your only macros. You have carb, fat, protein. So if it's like a pie chart of 100%, whatever you dedicate each percentage to depends on your goals. So I would make sure to think about how the goals are being distributed, especially because a part of his question, I think, was when he's filling the gaps in his diet, how should he fill them? Should it be with protein, carbs, or fat? Depends on your goal. If it's athletic performance, you should be filling those gaps likely with protein and carbs. If it doesn't really matter what you're training for, if it's just for healthy lifestyle, whatever, just to look good, feel good, then it doesn't matter too much what you fill it with. But it also matters that you're satisfied, that you feel good, and that you're where you're increasing your calories from is not neglecting the things we just talked about, like your micronutrients, stuff like that. Like if you're filling your diet with empty calories that provide no nutrient density, then that's not good either. So I would bring those points back.
It's great point. And to kind of add on to the micro, or sorry, the macronutrient, when it comes to carbohydrates and fats, like there's a lot of science that supports the fact that as we as humans, our primary fuel source to burn is going to be carbohydrates. So we don't want to shy away from carbohydrates. A lot of times people will maybe put a little bit too much emphasis on being cautious with the carb consumption. It depends, like Sam said, depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve. I know when I was fighting professionally, it had a very specific weight that was associated. So I was very cautious of when I would eat my carbs, but I would still consume carbohydrates for sure. And then there's a lot of science that support our secondary fuel source is fat. So depending on what your goals are, if it was to lose weight, for example, or maintain a specific weight, I would be cautious on when I eat those specific carbs. And then if I was going to indulge, if you will, in anything, I would indulge in a little bit higher volumes of fat, knowing that that would be my secondary fuel source. So, to Sam's point, a level of satiation where you feel satisfied and you feel full will be very, very reminiscent to the food choices that we consume. So for an example, half an avocado, for example, doesn't look like a lot of food, but it has high levels of fat, which then in turn fill you. You feel full. When you eat a full whole apple, for example, there's high levels of fiber. So you're filling yourself, you're giving your body the satiation that it requires to, perform and to, expel energy throughout the day. But it's not an overconsumption of any specific thing that may have a negative detriment. And then to bring it back, it really is goal oriented. So if you're looking just to have maximum output, always perform at your best when you're in the gym doing your thing, then absolutely, I 100% agree with Sam. Do not be hesitant to consume carbohydrates. Not only are they your fuel source, but it's also, there's a cognitive connection as well. Sometimes when we're a little bit depleted in carbohydrates, we may find it difficult to, string sentences together, or we may find that there's a little bit of cognitive fog. And we can eliminate some of that cognitive fog by consuming quality sources of carbohydrates.
Yeah, I think something that you're pointing out there too is how you perform in terms of your cognitive abilities. And since he's a student, some people thrive on certain times of day having carbs and other times of day not. Maybe they give you mental clarity. Maybe they take away from mental clarity. Maybe the best time to have them is when you're in the gym and not going to class. You can also play around with when you're consuming each macro in order to meet what your preferences are. So if you're somebody who's concerned about your caloric intake, if let's say Yannick's goal was weight loss and he's like, I want to have 2,700 calories, but I'm trying to lose weight, then the best time for him to have his most carbohydrate dense meal would be around training. So that's when you can get a little bit more strategic with when you're having your different macros to help accelerate or just support your goal. So in that example, that's when you can start playing around those variables, but it doesn't mean that you have to. So there's definitely ways you can look at your diet to supplement your lifestyle and your schedule.
I agree with you. And I also think the best way to achieve that is to journal. Take note of what it is you're eating and what time you're eating. And then when you look over, a 6 or 7 day period, as you look back throughout the week, for example, there are components of the day that you felt really well, like you felt really good, felt high energy. And then there's probably components of the day where you're dragging butt a little bit. So if you are pretty detailed with your journal taking notes, you'll have a really good indicator of what foods you ate when that had the effect that either you desired or less desired. And typically our bodies will work in 24-hour circadian rhythms. So much like sleep, our food intake is very similar. So how we perform tomorrow will have a direct correlation with what we consume today, for an example. So not only how we sleep, but also the nutrition that we consume. So consider that as a factor as well. Take good notes, and really identify when you felt great and when you were kind of like, a little under the weather or maybe dragging butt a little bit. And then there's probably a direct correlation to not just the quality of sleep, but also the consumption of nutrition. So hopefully that helps, and hopefully that answers the question for Yannick. We have another question. Actually, is there anything else you want to add for Yannick, Sam? If
I don't
Any,
think so. I think we covered some pretty big bases there.
is there any particular food, Sam, when it comes to your carb intake for you? Um, is there anything that you would recommend as a, just as an offering to Yannick? So food considerations. When you go to the grocery store, when you're about to prep a meal for yourself, Sam, what are the carbohydrates that you like to consume? Not only because you like them, but you know that they're going to give you the effect that you want.
That's a really good point. Yeah, because sometimes we like what we don't necessarily want to have more of. Like I have some vices for sure. But yeah, I'm a creature of habit with my diet and my nutrition. I eat the same things all the time. I don't stray too much. And that's just because I like what I like. So I'm not very exciting. Every morning I get up and I have like my eggs and my toast, my blueberries, some other fruit maybe. My lunch is usually like some type a wrap with lots of stuff inside: avocado, tomato, um, peppers, like all sorts of good stuff with like a meat source. I might have a like snack that's a protein bar, for example. And then my dinner is usually a meat and a veggie. And if I have room for it, maybe potatoes or something like that. But that's like my diet on repeat. But that's because I have the luxury of making my own food and grocery shopping for myself. So Yannick going to the cafeteria, um, he could probably look for better nutrient dense foods than others. So like looking for the vegetables and the fruit, hopefully the veggies hopefully are not cooked in like really crappy oil or doused in salt and all these other things that are going to make him feel not great. Not that should be avoided. You should definitely be consuming salt, but they tend to process things weird in cafeterias to make them last. Looking for eggs is awesome because it's hard to not have like solid eggs, like there's a lot of things that are guaranteed going to be pretty good.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking for my carbs, I'm looking for the ones that I enjoy that make me feel full, but not like a sloth. Like if I have a lot of pasta, I feel like I'm going to fall asleep. But it also depends what I'm having with that pasta. So you need to think about what you're having in conjunction with things. So for me, my toast in the morning doesn't make me feel lethargic. So I have that and I enjoy it. So it's kind of like a win-win.
Yeah.
But lunch, if I'm having pasta at lunch, I will crash in the afternoon. So a wrap is a good compromise for me because it's way less total carbs, but it's still carbs. Mm-hmm. It makes me feel satisfied. I enjoy it. It gives me the energy at the time that I need. And then for dinner, when I know that I'm not having to do anything crazy at night anyway, that's when I would indulge in something like a bunch of pasta or potatoes or something that maybe makes me feel a little bit more sleepy, but that's me. So it definitely depends on the person. Yeah. I do like to fill up my carbs with good fruits and veggies though.
Awesome. And for the military guys that are watching and the law enforcement guys that are watching, sometimes we're called to task and we don't have the luxury of a sit down meal, or we're just grabbing something on the go. This is where, athletic greens are a good compromise. Protein shakes are a good compromise because it doesn't take much to, add a little bit of pre-planning into the kit bag or the travel bag, where maybe you got a small jar of protein powder, a small jar of athletic greens. And the great thing about it is all you really need is water to mix that stuff up. So if you feel like maybe you're gone a couple of days, or for guys that maybe are deployed and you eat what's provided for you, eat what's available, sometimes it might not be ideal. I know I can speak from experience. I've been very fortunate where I had some great experiences in the past where the food was fantastic, working within the Canadian Armed Forces. And then I've had some experiences where the food is absolutely deplorable. So controlling what you can control, there are certain things that I was able to control. So a little bit of pre-planning, I'd pack some protein powder, and then I'd pack some greens. And then I would use that stuff sparingly. I wouldn't rely on it every single day, multiple times a day, but I would use it sparingly. Every day when I did decide to consume that stuff, I would sip on it. So I wouldn't just crush it and then end up peeing half of it out. I would sip on it and allow the body to actually absorb the goodness that it was there to provide for. So these are some considerations when thinking about, all right, well, I'm forward deployed, or, fulfilling a task where, you might be busy for 12, 14, 16 hours, and that quality meal might not be there, but you need something to keep yourself cognitively sharp. You need something to keep your energy relatively high. So those are some considerations to think about. All right, so the next question we have is from a young man, Trent Duncan. He's a grade 12 student, and he is definitely interested in life in the military, specifically special forces. He's definitely interested in that career, but he's also interested in, a university path. So he's interested in doing 4 years of university, give or take, prior to the military. And so he's a young man and he's asking me, what would I recommend this route, or would I recommend one route over the other? Phew, that's a good question. So a young man, 12 years old, or 12 years old, grade 12, he's, definitely interested in the military career, but he's considering university as well. This is a tough question because there's never really the perfect time for anything. Oftentimes we'll often fall into a bit of a spiral where I'll just wait until times are right. I'll just wait until this thing happens or that thing happens. I don't know, man. I'm a firm believer, if there's something that you really want to do it now. Do it while you can. So if you're a good student right now and you're about to graduate grade 12, then and you have an inkling or an interest of university, I would say go after it. You can always join the military afterwards. And in fact, the Canadian Forces has an offering where you don't necessarily have to commit to a Reg Force full-time job in the military. You can do a reserve supplement. So you can still do part and parcel to your part, for your part and for your country, and be proud of your reserve involvement while you still tackle 4 years of university. So I think you could probably do both if you have a level of time management that is required to do both. But I do believe you don't necessarily have to hard fast pick one or the other. That would be my advice to you. Consider a reserve route, always knowing that your end goal, by the sounds of it, is to create a career for yourself in special operations, which is awesome. Good for you, and I hope you get after it. University, will it benefit your military career? I don't know, maybe so, but not necessarily. Yes, university is going to teach you to fulfill and follow through on tasks. It's going to teach you, ways to particularly maybe learn and absorb information. Not necessarily sure that it's going to be required for your success in the military. However, it's a viable option. What do you
I
think?
know some people who were reservists while they were in university, and I don't think anybody really had a strong opinion of not being able to do dual task and do both. I think all of them loved doing both at the same time, from what I recall. And I have a couple of friends who, correct me if I'm wrong, Randy, but because they had a university degree, once they were finished, they were able to kind of go to a different like rank or like part of the military where they became something. I don't know. I don't know how to use the correct terminology, and I don't want to speak out of place, but
Yeah,
they became like an officer as opposed to having to do like a few other things before that.
that's right.
So they enjoyed that they were able to go a little further, a little quicker
Yeah.
after they were finished their studies. Is that the correct path?
You're right. So oftentimes there's the non-commissioned officers and then there's commissioned officers. So typically the commissioned officers, there's a couple of routes that they can take. So if we're talking about officer realms within the Canadian Armed Forces, there's a university known as the Royal Canadian Military College University in Kingston, Ontario. And oftentimes those who are interested in becoming a military officer, they will take that route. Now, doing that route, you receive education, get a degree in one field or another, and then you still have employment within the Canadian Armed Forces as an officer. Not saying that you cannot become an officer in the Canadian Armed Forces without going to RMC, but you will require some sort of university education in order to fulfill from outside of the Canadian Armed Forces to fulfill a position as an officer. Now, once you're in uniform as a non-commissioned officer and you work your way through the ranks, you could continue with education. And at some point, as a non-commissioned officer, you can do a transfer where you become a commissioned officer. So that is not uncommon as well. What I would say is the Canadian Armed Forces are very top heavy, which means there are, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, it's not a slight against officers, well, maybe a little bit. There's way too many officers. We have way too many officers that are fulfilling jobs. And, I'm going to take a little stab at them or whatever. There's no disrespect intended, but I'm having some fun. There's three officers, for example, for one task. There's one officer to write the letter. There's one officer to put the letter inside of the envelope, and then there's another officer to send the envelope in the mail. It's like, settle down, Canadian Armed Forces, settle down. We don't need that many officers clogging up the whole process. What we need is more warriors. What we need is more people that are willing to do the job and get their hands dirty. Because the reality is, oftentimes, the good officers, the really, really good officers, they'll get to a point where they're not fully fulfilled, and they'll either move on or move out. And then the non-commissioned officers that work their way up through the ranks with the men, with the people that are actually doing it, could be women too. I'm just using that as a term. What you'll see is at some point in their career, they may transfer over. So they've done maybe 10 years plus in a non-commissioned position within the Canadian Forces. And then because they have a university degree or they've worked towards continued education while they were serving, then they can transition and become an officer if they wanted to for the next 10, 15 years of their career. So there's lots of options. The Canadian Forces is awesome in terms of it provides a lot of opportunity for those who are interested and motivated to get after it. I think when it comes to education, there's a lot of heat and light put on continued education as it's a requirement or as it's needed to advance. And I don't believe that's the case. There's a lot of smart men and women out there who don't have a university education, and they're doing really good things for the Canadian Armed Forces. So I think, those folks need to be celebrated just as much as the folks that did university prior to. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, hopefully that answers your question, Trent. And to pile on to Sam's acknowledgements, there is a definite difference in terms of the career path for a officer and for a non-commissioned member. The career paths are a little bit different. And from my experience, if you really want to do a lot of good things and try to avoid maybe spending too much time behind a computer, then you might want to think about non-commissioned route. Cool. So anyway, there's a couple of questions for Trent and for Yannick. So hopefully Sam and I were able to address a couple of things that may be helpful, not just for you guys, but also other viewers that are tuning in for a weekly intake of Sam and I's Q&A. So on that note, I guess I'll leave it to Sam for any closing points with regard to nutrition or just university versus other career paths.
Yeah, I think the biggest take home for nutrition for most people is similar to your vehicle. A lot of us care, about how our vehicle performs. So think of yourself like your vehicle, and especially if you're a performer. So if you're somebody who has to perform for a sport, for a job, whatever it might be, we all need to perform in our lives. So you should take what you're fueling your body with very seriously. And it makes me really happy that Yannick asked those questions, because a lot of people don't take their nutrition seriously, but you will feel insanely better if you just put better things in your body. So higher quality foods, higher quality nutrients. Maybe it means you spend a little bit more on your food, but you put nice tires on your car, you should probably put nice quality food in your body. So I think it's really important to remember that you want to take care of yourself first and foremost, because you don't want to get down the line and be like, I've been eating really bad, like McDonald's every day for the last 20 years, and now I have a heart condition or whatever it might be. Like, take it seriously right from the get-go, even though you might not notice a astronomical effect right away. I promise you, nutrition is absolutely key for everything. And you want to be a performer, even if it's not for a sport, job, or activity. Just be a performer in your day-to-day life, and you'll feel so much better. So I think Yannick's a good example of, he's not in an ideal situation to be taking the best care of himself, but he's still doing the best he can. Yeah. And a lot of us have more control than Yannick does, and we can do more than he has the ability to in this instance. So let's take advantage of the opportunity that we're given and fuel ourselves accordingly.
That's awesome. Great advice, Sam. And thanks to Yannick and Trent as well for providing the questions, because the reality is there are a lot of people out there that are probably thinking very similarly and maybe just need a little nudge of guidance. So hopefully his question being presented will also, clarify and open a couple of opportunities for others that may be paying attention. So I echo Sam's point. I treat my body like a machine, like a temple. So I want the machine to operate as best as it possibly can. And the best way for that to happen is to give it proper nutrition. So of course, we're human, and there's going to be slip ups from time to time, but that's okay. You know, like everything in moderation is acceptable. You know, so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, just do the best you can as often as you can, and you'll get results.
Yes. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, Sam. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to connect with me. And thanks for the folks for presenting the questions. Keep them coming, guys. We'll address them as they come. And we like doing this a lot. So hopefully this is benefiting people. And, you know, it's a win-win for everybody. So on that note, Sam, thank you very much. I know you got a session coming up, so get ready to you know, put it on your clients and make them feel the best that they possibly can, like I know you will. And you and I will connect again when I'm off the road here in another week or so.
Sounds great. Thanks, everybody.
All right, take care, guys. Stay strong, remain healthy, keep doing what you can, and always stay in the fight.